The vampire king disguised as a beggar to test his pack. The poorest girl shared her only bread. Chapter 1. The beggar at the Gothic. Winter wind bit through Lara's threadbare shawl as she hurried down Ashford's cobblestone streets, clutching the single loaf of bread she'd earned after 14 hours of mending clothes in the textile merchant's dim workshop. Her fingers were raw from needle pricks, her back ached from hunching over torn seams. But the warm weight of bread against her chest felt like victory. She'd eaten nothing since yesterday's thin broth. The narrow streets grew darker as she left the merchant's quarter behind, passing beneath stone archways that belonged to an older, stranger city, one that predated gaslight and modern roads. Here, the buildings leaned close, their windows shuttered against more than cold. Everyone knew the old district belonged to them after nightfall, the night walkers, the blood-sworn, the houses. Lara didn't believe half the stories whispered in taverns, but she'd learned to be home before full dark anyway. Survival didn't require belief, only caution. She was steps from her boarding house when she saw him, a figure slumped against the iron cemetery gate, barely visible in the shadow of the stone wall. He wore rags that might once have been fine clothes, torn and stained beyond recognition. His head hung forward, dark hair obscuring his face. One hand pressed against his side where something dark blood, she realized with a jolt, seeped between his fingers. Lara's first instinct was to walk past. The city was full of desperate people, and she had nothing to give. She was one missed day of work away from joining them in the gutter. But something made her stop. Perhaps it was the unnatural stillness of him, the way he didn't shiver despite the freezing wind. Perhaps it was the memory of her own hunger, still too fresh, too familiar. Or perhaps it was simply that she'd been invisible for so long that she couldn't walk past someone else who seemed to be fading from the world. She approached slowly, her worn boots nearly silent on the frost-slicked stones. "Sir?" Her voice came out softer than intended. "Are you hurt?" He didn't move. For a moment, she thought he might be dead, but then his chest rose with a slow, deliberate breath that seemed more conscious effort than reflex. "Leave." His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper, but it carried an edge of command that made her step back instinctively. "I'm dangerous company tonight." The words should have sent her running. Instead, she found herself kneeling beside him, close enough now to see that his skin was far too pale, his breathing too shallow. The blood seeping through his fingers looked nearly black in the darkness. "You're bleeding," she said, stating the obvious, because she didn't know what else to say. "Do you need a physician?" A sound escaped him, something between a laugh and a cough. "No physician in this city would come for me." He finally lifted his head, and Lara's breath caught, even ravaged by pain and hunger. His face was arresting. Sharp cheekbones, a severe mouth, and eyes that gleamed in the darkness with an intensity that shouldn't have been possible in someone so clearly dying. Those eyes fixed on her with predatory focus, and she understood, suddenly and completely, why he'd told her to leave. She'd heard enough stories to recognize the signs. The unnatural pallor, the way shadows seemed to cling to him, the fact that he sat bleeding in front of a cemetery at night as if he belonged there. "You're one of them," she breathed. Not a question. Yes, he didn't bother denying it. Which is why a smart woman would walk away. Lara should have. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to get inside where the boarding house's threshold might offer protection. The houses and their politics were dangerous, their wars deadly to anyone caught between them. Getting involved with a wounded vampire was suicide, but she'd survived this long by trusting the instincts others ignored. And those instincts weren't screaming danger, they were screaming wrong. Something about this felt orchestrated, like a test she hadn't known she was taking. "Did someone do this to you?" she asked instead of fleeing, his mouth curved in something too bitter to be a smile. "My own people." He closed his eyes, leaning back against the iron gate as if the admission had cost him. "They hunger for power. I no longer have the strength to hold. So they arranged for me to be elsewhere when the feeding was called. 3 nights without blood. Another night, and even I will be ash. 3 nights. Vampires needed fresh blood every few days or they weakened. Everyone knew that much. 3 nights would leave even a strong vampire desperate and dangerous. Lara looked down at the bread still clutched against her chest. Her only meal. Tomorrow was Sunday, and the workshop was closed. She had 2 copper coins left and no guarantee of work on Monday. "If you feed," she heard herself ask, "will you survive?" Those strange luminous eyes opened again, fixing on her with an intensity that made her heart race. "Are you offering?" No, the word came quickly, instinctively. She wasn't that desperate or that foolish. But she unwrapped the bread, breaking off half and offering it to him. It's not much, but it's something. He stared at the bread as if she'd offered him diamonds. I can't eat mortal food, I know. Elara set the bread on his knee anyway. But the gesture stands. You're hungry. So am I. That makes us the same tonight, doesn't it? Something shifted in his expression, surprise, maybe, or confusion. He picked up the bread with his free hand, turning it over as if examining a puzzle he couldn't solve. What's your name? The question came quietly, without the earlier edge of command. Elara Thorn. She kept her own half of the bread, though she didn't eat it yet. And you? Names have power. He studied her face with unnerving focus. Especially mine. Then I'll call you stranger. She stood, brushing frost from her skirt. Can you walk? My boarding house is 3 streets over. It's not much, but it's warmer than a cemetery gate. Why? The word stopped her mid-turn. Why help? What did you call us? One of them? Elara looked back at him, this wounded creature who commanded even in collapse, who'd warned her away even while dying. Because someone should. She didn't wait for his response, just started walking. Behind her, she heard him rise with movements too fluid for someone who'd been dying moments ago. His footsteps followed, silent as death on the frozen stones. Neither of them spoke again until they reached her door. But Elara felt his attention on her like weight, like gravity, like fate rearranging itself in the winter dark. She didn't yet know. She'd just shared bread with the vampire king of the northern house. She didn't yet know that single act of compassion would shatter 3 centuries of blood law. She only knew that for the first time in months, she didn't feel quite so alone. Chapter 2. The threshold. Elara's room was barely large enough for a narrow bed, a washstand, and a single chair wedged beneath a window that overlooked the alley. She'd lived here for 8 months, ever since she'd fled her father's gambling debts and the marriage he'd arranged to settle them. The room cost 4 coppers a week, and Mrs. Hewitt, who ran the boarding house, didn't ask questions as long as rent appeared on time. She'd never brought anyone here before. The stranger filled the small space with presence that had nothing to do with his physical size. He stood just inside the threshold, unmoving, as if waiting for permission she hadn't realized she needed to give. You can sit, Elara said, gesturing to the chair. Her voice sounded strange in the quiet, too loud, too uncertain. The bed would be more practical. His gaze swept the room with the efficiency of someone assessing tactical advantages. I'll need to lie flat to slow the bleeding. Heat crept up Elara's neck. Her bed, her only bed with a vampire in it. The impropriety should have scandalized her more than the danger. Of course. Let me. She moved to help him, but he was already crossing the room with movements that looked effortless despite the blood still seeping through his fingers. Up close in the lamplight, she could see how badly he'd been injured. His shirt was shredded, revealing wounds that looked like claw marks, 4 parallel gouges across his ribs that would have gutted a human. Silver, he said, catching her stare. Burns slower, heals differently. Elara had heard that silver could harm vampires, but she'd thought it was myth, like garlic and running water. Who did this to you? My cousin. He lowered himself onto the bed with careful precision, each movement controlled despite obvious pain. He's coveted my position for decades. Tonight, he found allies willing to help him claim it. Your position? Elara hung her shawl on the door hook, then moved to the washstand, where she kept a clean cloth and a pitcher of water. It seemed absurd to tend vampire wounds with mortal supplies, but she needed something to do with her hands. You ask many questions for someone who claims not to believe the stories. There was something almost amused in his tone, though pain threaded through it. I never said I didn't believe. She dampened the cloth and approached the bed, hesitating at the edge. I said I didn't believe half of them. May I? He watched her for a long moment, then nodded once. Elara knelt beside the bed and gently pulled away the remnants of his shirt. The wounds looked worse in full light, deep gouges that exposed muscle and bone, edges blackened as if burned. She pressed the damp cloth carefully to the least damaged area, and he went absolutely still. You're not afraid of my blood? He observed quietly. She should have been. Vampire blood was supposed to be dangerous, addictive, corrupting. But it looked like any blood she'd ever seen, dark and wet, and proof of mortality, even in immortal flesh. Should I be? Most mortals are. His voice had dropped lower, intimate in the small room's quiet. They smell death in it. recognized something fundamentally wrong. Alara cleaned around the worst of the wounds with steady hands, though her heart raced. I've seen death. My mother died when I was 12. My brother at 14. Death smells like sickness and suffering. You just smell like... She paused, searching for words. Like old stone. Like winter. Like something ancient, perceptive. Something shifted in his expression, surprise again, or perhaps respect. Most humans can't distinguish between death and age. They're not the same, though mortals rarely live long enough to learn the difference. She set aside the bloodied cloth and reached for the clean water. How old are you? Old enough to have forgotten what bread tastes like. He gestured to the half loaf she'd set on the washstand. Why did you offer it? You knew I couldn't eat it, because hunger should be acknowledged, even when it can't be satisfied. Alara met his gaze directly. And because you warned me away instead of attacking. That seemed worth something. Worth your only meal? I've been hungrier. She returned to cleaning his wounds, trying not to think about how surreal this was, kneeling beside a vampire in her bed, tending injuries that should have killed him, having the most honest conversation she'd had in months. You'll survive the night? If the wounds close before dawn. He studied her face with unsettling focus. But I need stillness, rest, things I haven't had since they ambushed me. Then rest. Alara stood and moved to the chair, positioning it so she could see both the door and the window. I'll keep watch. His eyebrows rose slightly. You plan to protect me? A mortal woman with no weapons against vampires who could tear through that door like parchment. I plan to warn you if anyone comes. She settled into the chair, wrapping her shawl around her shoulders against the cold. You're wounded. You need warning more than protection. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind rattling the window frame and distant sounds of the city settling into night. She thought he might argue, but instead he did something unexpected. He laughed. It was brief, barely more than an exhale, but genuine. What amuses you? She asked. You. He shifted on the bed, trying to find a position that didn't aggravate his wounds. You're terrified. I can hear your heartbeat racing, but you're sitting between me and the door anyway. Either remarkably brave or remarkably foolish. Perhaps both. Alara pulled her knees up, making herself smaller in the chair. Or perhaps just tired of running. Something in those words seemed to reach him. His expression softened almost imperceptibly. What are you running from? Alara Thorne. No one had asked her that. Not Mrs. Hewitt, when she'd arrived with bruises on her wrists and desperation in her eyes. Not the textile merchant who paid her barely enough to survive. No one wanted to know the stories of people like her, the ones who'd fallen through society's cracks. A future I didn't choose, she said quietly. And you? The same. He closed his eyes, and for the first time since she'd found him, he looked almost vulnerable. Though I've been running considerably longer. Alara watched him in the lamplight. This impossible creature who commanded even in collapse, who'd shared truth when lies would have been easier. The wounds across his ribs had stopped bleeding, she noticed, though they still looked raw and angry. You never told me your name, she said. No, his eyes remained closed. I didn't, but you told me your cousin wants your position. That means you're someone important, someone powerful. She hesitated, then took the risk. Someone whose name would mean something if I knew it. His mouth curved slightly. Dangerously perceptive. Is that a yes? It's a warning. He opened his eyes, and they caught the lamplight strangely, reflecting it back like an animal's. Some names carry weight. Little mortal. Obligations. Consequences. Once you know mine, you'll be bound to this story in ways you can't undo. Alara should have told him to keep his secrets. Should have maintained distance, safety. Instead, she heard herself say, then tell me in the morning. When you've decided if I'm worth the risk. He studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Fair terms. Sleep, she urged. I'll wake you if anyone comes. And you? I'll be fine. She pulled her shawl tighter. I've spent harder nights than this. He didn't argue further, just let his eyes drift closed. Within moments, his breathing slowed to something deep and steady. Though she suspected he wasn't truly sleeping, merely conserving strength. Staying alert despite the appearance of rest, Alara sat in her chair and watched the night deepen beyond her window, acutely aware of every sound, every shadow. She'd invited danger across her threshold tonight. She'd chosen compassion over caution. She couldn't quite bring herself to regret it. Outside, the city's church bells tolled midnight. In 7 hours, dawn would break. She just had to keep them both alive until then. Chapter 3. Unnatural things. Dawn came slowly, bleeding pale light through Alara's window until it touched the edge of her bed. She dozed in her chair twice during the night, jerking awake each time with her heart pounding, certain she'd heard footsteps in the hall. But no one had come. The boarding house remained silent except for the usual creaks and groans of old wood settling. The stranger she still didn't know his name hadn't moved since midnight. He lay perfectly still, his chest rising and falling in breaths that came too slowly, too evenly, to be natural sleep. She'd counted once, 7 breaths per minute. A human would suffocate. As sunlight crept closer to the bed, he suddenly opened his eyes, closed the curtains. No grogginess, no transition between sleep and waking. Just immediate, absolute awareness. Now, Alara moved without thinking, yanking the thin fabric across the window. The room plunged back into shadow, lit only by the dying embers of lamplight. The sun won't kill me. Not immediately. He sat up with fluid grace that contradicted his wounds. But it weakens us. Burns slowly, like fever in your kind. Unpleasant enough to avoid. She turned to look at him properly in the dimness. The wounds across his ribs had closed overnight, not healed completely, but scabbed over with tissue that looked weeks old rather than hours. No human body could manage that. You heal fast, she observed, trying to keep her voice steady. Not fast enough. He examined the injuries with clinical detachment. Silver poisoning slows everything. These should have closed completely by now. His gaze shifted to her, sharp and assessing. You kept watch all night. It wasn't a question, but she nodded anyway. Her body ached from hours cramped in the chair, and exhaustion pulled at her limbs like weights. Foolish, he said, though something in his tone suggested he didn't entirely mean it. You should have slept. I would have woken if danger approached. How? Alara moved to the washstand, splashing cold water on her face to chase away the fatigue. You were. I don't even know what you were. Not asleep exactly. Day rest. He stood, testing his balance. We don't sleep the way you do. We exist in a state between consciousness and void. Aware, but distant. Present but. He paused, searching for words. Elsewhere, she watched him move around the small room, noting things she'd missed in last night's darkness and urgency. The way he didn't disturb the air when he walked, as if he weighed nothing. How his eyes tracked sounds she couldn't hear, the creak of floorboards 2 rooms away, conversations in the street below. The way he avoided the thin shaft of sunlight leaking around the curtain's edge with unconscious precision. You're staring. He noted, without looking at her. You're strange. The words escaped before she could stop them. Everything about you is wrong. The way you breathe. The way you move. Even your stillness is wrong to perfect to controlled. Like you're remembering to seem human instead of just being it. He turned to face her fully, and she saw approval flicker across his features. Most mortals notice nothing. They see what they expect to see: a man, a stranger, someone ordinary. The mind rejects what doesn't fit its understanding. But I notice. Alara leaned against the washstand, suddenly aware of how small her room was with him in it. How his presence seemed to fill spaces that shouldn't exist. Because I'm not most mortals. Because you're paying attention. He moved closer, and she fought the urge to step back. Tell me what else you've noticed. It felt like a test. She took a breath and answered honestly. You don't blink often enough. Your skin is too cold. I felt it when I cleaned your wounds. You cast a reflection in my mirror, but it's muted somehow, less solid than it should be. She paused. And you haven't looked at my neck once, even though you're starving. Something dark and approving flickered in his expression. Observant and brave. A dangerous combination. You still haven't warned me away properly, she pointed out. Last night you said I should leave. This morning, you're testing how much I notice. Which is it? Do you want me gone or not? Both. The honesty in his voice surprised her. You should run from me, Alara Thorne. Whatever instinct made you help me last night, smother it. Forget you found me. Forget this room, this conversation. Go back to your textile work and your quiet life, and never, ever cross paths with my kind again. Because you're dangerous. Because I'm dying. He gestured to his wounds. Even with rest, these injuries would take weeks to heal properly. I have perhaps 3 days before the silver poisoning spreads too far. My cousin knows this. He's already sent word to the other houses. The northern throne sits empty. They'll come for it, and you'll fight them. I'll try. He smiled without humor. I'll fail. And anyone near me when that happens will become collateral damage in a war you can't imagine. Alara should have been terrified. She could feel it humming under her skin, electric and insistent. But stronger than fear was curiosity, sharp and demanding. Why did your cousin betray you? She asked. What did you do to make him hate you enough for this? I refuse to sanction a culling. The words came hard, bitter. Every century, the houses thin mortal populations in their territories. Kill the witnesses, the threats, anyone who knows too much. My cousin wanted to purge Ashford's old district 300 souls. I said no 300 people. Alara's stomach turned. Because you value human life? Because I'm tired. He turned away, looking at the curtained window as if he could see through it. 3 centuries of blood law. 3 centuries of watching mortals live and die while we remain, unchanging. 3 centuries of cullings and blood oaths and political games that mean nothing because we'll all still be here in another 100 years. Playing the same games with different pieces. The weariness in his voice struck something deep in her chest. She heard her own exhaustion reflected in it, the bone-deep tiredness of survival without purpose, existence without meaning. You're the king, she said quietly, understanding dawning. That's your position. That's why your name has power. He looked back at her, and for the first time, she saw him clearly not as a stranger or a vampire or a monster, but as someone who'd carried the weight of eternity until it had broken him. Lucian Blackthorne, he said. King of the Northern House, first of the blood, last of my line. His expression was unreadable. And yes, before you ask, the name binds you now. You know who I am, what I am, and what finding me means. The other houses will assume you're allied with me. My cousin will hunt you just to wound me. You're part of this war, whether you chose it or not. Alara absorbed this, turning it over in her mind. She should have been angry at being dragged into vampire politics without consent. Instead, she felt oddly calm, as if some part of her had known the moment she'd offered him bread that there would be no going back. Then I suppose, she said slowly, you'd better tell me everything I need to know to survive it. Lucian stared at her as if seeing her for the first time. You're not leaving. No, she met his gaze steadily. I'm not. Why? Because she was tired of running. Because kindness shouldn't come with regrets. Because something in his weariness called to something in hers. And she was so desperately tired of being alone. Because someone should, she said. Echoing her words from last night, for a long moment, he said nothing. Then, almost imperceptibly, he nodded. Then we have work to do, Lucian said. And very little time to do it. Chapter 4. Blood and Bread. Lucian taught her vampire law as morning stretched toward noon, his voice low and steady in the curtained darkness of her room. He sat on the edge of her bed, while she remained in the chair, maintaining a careful distance that felt more like respect than fear. The first law, he said, is consent. We cannot feed without permission, given freely and without coercion. Breaking this law means immediate execution by the eldest of your house. Alara listened, filing away each detail. But you're the eldest of your house, which makes my cousin's betrayal technically legal. Bitterness edged his words. He didn't break blood law. He simply arranged circumstances so I couldn't feed. Starvation isn't murder in the eyes of the other houses. It's nature taking its course. That seems like a convenient loophole. Politics often are. He flexed his hands, studying his pale fingers as if seeing them from a distance. The second law, a vampire cannot create another without permission from their house king. New immortals upset the balance, create instability. Too many vampires in one territory, and we'd hunt mortals to extinction within decades. How many vampires are in Ashford? In the Northern House? 43, as of last month. He met her gaze. In the entire city, including the southern and eastern territories. Perhaps 200. Among a mortal population of 50,000, the numbers surprised her. She'd imagined armies of vampires, hordes of undead. Instead, they were rare, precious, and dangerous, like poisonous flowers. The third law, Lucian continued, is the most important. We do not interfere in mortal governance. We exist in the shadows, take what we need, and leave your kind to rule themselves. Breaking this law means war between the houses, but you do interfere. Alara leaned forward. You said you refused to sanction a culling. That's interference, isn't it? Choosing who lives and dies. Yes. The admission seemed to cost him something. Which is why many in my house support my cousin's claim. They believe I've grown too, attached to mortal concerns. Too soft. Alara studied his face, the sharp angles, the ancient eyes, the weight of centuries in every careful movement. You don't seem soft. No? Something almost amused flickered across his features. I let a mortal woman tend my wounds. Accepted bread I couldn't eat. Told her my name and my secrets. What would you call that? Lonely, she said quietly. The word hung between them like smoke. Lucien's expression shifted surprise, then recognition, then something that looked almost like pain. Yes, he said finally. That too. Silence settled over the room. Outside, Alara could hear the city waking fully, carts rattling past, vendors calling their wares. The ordinary sounds of mortal life continuing without awareness of the immortal predator hiding in a boarding house room. Her stomach growled, breaking the moment. She pressed a hand to it, embarrassed. When did you last eat? Lucien asked, his tone gentler than before. Yesterday? The bread I gave you. She shrugged as if it didn't matter, though hunger gnawed at her. I'll have something tomorrow after I work. You work on Sundays? When I can find it. She didn't mention that the textile merchant was closed Sundays, or that she had 2 copper coins and no prospects. Pride kept the words locked behind her teeth. Lucien stood and moved to the washstand, where she'd left the remaining half-loaf of bread. He picked it up carefully, as if it were something precious, and brought it to her. Eat, he said simply. That's mine, I mean. I gave it to you, and I'm giving it back. He pressed it into her hands. I told you I can't eat mortal food. It would be wasted on me. Alara looked down at the bread, then up at him. You kept it all night. It seemed important. He returned to the bed, settling with careful precision. The gesture, I mean. You offered it when you had nothing else to give. That kind of generosity is rare. She broke off a small piece, chewing slowly to make it last. You must have seen countless acts of generosity in 3 centuries. Not to me. The words came quietly. Kings receive tribute, fear, political maneuvering. Rarely kindness. Never. Bread. Something in his voice made her pause. How long have you been king? 287 years. He leaned back against the wall, exhaustion showing in the lines of his face. I took the throne when I was barely 40 years turned. Young for a vampire king. Reckless, some said. What happened to the previous king? She walked into the sun. Lucien's expression went distant, lost in memory. My maker, my queen. She ruled for 6 centuries before the weight of it broke her. One morning, she simply stepped outside, told me the crown was mine, now, burned to ash before I could stop her. The grief in his voice was old but unhealed, a wound that time hadn't closed. Alara set down her bread and moved closer, perching on the edge of the bed beside him, close enough to offer comfort, far enough to preserve the careful boundaries they'd established. I'm sorry, she said, and meant it. She taught me everything. His hands clenched and unclenched in his lap. How to rule, how to survive, how to navigate blood law without losing myself to it. She believed vampires could be more than predators, that we could exist alongside humanity without constant culling, without treating mortals as livestock. He looked at Alara then, truly looked at her. She would have liked you, because I noticed you were strange, because you're brave enough to sit beside a starving vampire and offer comfort instead of your throat. He smiled, but it was sad, weighted with centuries of isolation. Most mortals who know what I am either run or kneel. You just sit, as if I'm simply a person you're getting to know. Aren't you? Alara asked. A person, I mean. Immortal and dangerous and strange, yes, but still a person underneath all that. Lucien studied her as if she'd said something profound. I haven't felt like a person in decades. Just a crown, a function, a throne that needed filling. That sounds exhausting. It was. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, he looked vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with his wounds. It is. Alara reached out slowly, telegraphing her movement, and placed her hand over his. His skin was cool, but not corpse cold, more like stone warmed by moonlight. He went very still, as if uncertain how to respond to such simple contact. You don't have to be just a crown in this room, she said quietly. Here, you can just be Lucien. His eyes opened, and something raw and unguarded looked back at her. I don't remember how. Then we'll figure it out together. She squeezed his hand gently, one moment at a time. For a long breath, neither of them moved. Then Lucien turned his hand over, interlacing his fingers with hers. The gesture felt monumental, intimate in a way that transcended romance or desire, just 2 lonely souls reaching across the gulf between mortal and immortal. Finding unexpected connection. You should eat the rest of your bread, he said finally, though he didn't release her hand. You'll need your strength for what comes next. What comes next? My cousin will send scouts to find me, probably tonight, when I'm strongest. He met her gaze steadily. When they come, things will get dangerous very quickly. I need you to promise me something. What? If I tell you to run, if I give you the chance to escape, you'll take it. His grip tightened slightly. Promise me, Alara. She wanted to promise, wanted to give him that peace. But she'd made too many promises to men who wanted her obedience. And she'd learned that promises given under pressure were cages in disguise. I promise, she said slowly, to make that choice when the moment comes. Not before. Lucien's expression shifted through surprise, frustration, and finally something that looked like reluctant admiration. You're going to be the death of me. Not if I can help it, she smiled, despite the fear threading through her chest. We survive together or not at all. He shook his head, but didn't argue further. Instead, he just held her hand in the dimness of her curtained room and let himself, for the first time in decades, not be a king, just Lucien. Just a person. It was enough. Chapter 5. Hunters in the dark. The church bells tolled 3 when Lucien went rigid beside her. Alara had been reading aloud from a battered novel she'd borrowed from Mrs. Hewitt's lending shelf, trying to fill the waiting with normalcy. Lucien had been listening with his eyes closed, his hand still loosely holding hers. But at the third chime, his fingers tightened like a vice. They're here, he said. She set the book aside, heart suddenly racing. Where? 2 streets over. Moving toward us. His eyes snapped open, luminous in the dim room. 3 of them. Young vampires, 40, maybe 50 years, turned, fast and hungry for glory. How can you tell? I can feel them. He released her hand and stood, moving to the window. He didn't open the curtains, just pressed his palm flat against the wall beside them. All vampires of the same house are connected through bloodline. I made most of my house myself, turned them, taught them, bound them to me. They can't hide from me any more than children can hide from their father. Alara joined him at the window, keeping her voice low. Can they feel you too? Yes. His jaw tightened. They're tracking me. My cousin sent scouts to confirm I'm still alive, still weak. Once they report back, he'll come himself to finish what he started. Then we need to leave. Get out of the city and go where? Lucien turned to face her, and she saw the truth in his eyes before he spoke it. I'm too weak to run far. The silver poisoning has spread. I can feel it in my bones now, slowing everything. Another day, maybe 2, before I can't move at all. He gestured toward the window. Those 3 know it. They're young enough to be reckless, old enough to be deadly. If they attack now, I might take one. The other 2 would kill me. Then we hide. Or Alara's mind raced. Is there someone who could help? Someone in your house still loyal to you? Everyone still loyal to me is either hiding or already ash. The words came hard, bitter. My cousin was thorough. He spent months turning my supporters against me, promising them power in his new order. The few who refused, he trailed off, but she heard the grief beneath his control. Alara moved closer, lowering her voice to barely a whisper. What do they want? The scouts, I mean. Confirmation. They need to see me, verify I'm alive and where I'm hiding. Then they'll retreat and report. His expression went cold, calculating. But there's a complication. What? You? He met her gaze directly. You're mortal, unmarked, and clearly allied with me. By blood law, that makes you fair game for interrogation. The word interrogation sent ice down her spine. What does that mean? It means they'll drain you dry trying to learn what you know. Lucien's voice went flat, emotionless, but she saw rage burning beneath it. They'll assume I told you. House secrets, hiding places, allies. They'll tear through your mind and memories until there's nothing left. Alara's breath caught. Can they do that? Read minds? Older vampires can, through blood. It's imprecise, painful, and usually fatal to the mortal involved. He turned back to the window. They're closer now, 4 buildings away. She could hear nothing unusual, just normal city sounds, people going about their Sunday routines. But Lucien stood tense as wire, tracking movement she couldn't perceive. If they find me here, Alara said slowly, working through the logic, they'll question me, kill me, report to your cousin that you're sheltering in a boarding house with a mortal woman who knows too much. She looked up at him. What happens then? My cousin will burn this entire block. Lucien's voice was cold with certainty. 50 people dead, just to ensure you and I burn with them. Collateral damage. A message to anyone else who might shelter me. 50 people. Mrs. Hewitt, who'd asked no questions. The textile merchant's family on the next street. The baker who sometimes gave a Lara day old bread. All dead because she'd offered compassion to a dying king. We can't let that happen, she said. No, Lucian moved away from the window with sudden decision. Which is why you're going to walk out of this building, find somewhere public and crowded, and stay there until nightfall. And you? I'll leave through the roof. Lead them away from this district. He pulled on what remained of his shirt, grimacing as the fabric caught on his healing wounds. Once they're following me, you'll be safe. They'll lose interest in Immortal with no strategic value. Alara caught his arm. That's suicide. You just said you're too weak to run. I'm too weak to win a fight. Running is different. He covered her hand with his touch gentle despite the urgency in his voice. I can lead them into the old catacombs beneath the cemetery. The tunnels are narrow, easy to defend. I might hold them off long enough for what? You die slower instead of faster? She stepped in front of him, blocking his path to the door. That's not a plan. That's giving up. It's keeping you alive. Something raw flashed across his face. In 3 days, you've shown me more kindness than I've known in decades. I won't repay that by letting you burn. And I won't repay your trust by running while you die. Alara's mind raced, sorting through options. There has to be another way. Something they won't expect. Lucian studied her, and she saw the moment he recognized her determination, the same stubbornness that had made her stop for a dying stranger. That had kept her watching all night, that had made her refuse to leave when she'd learned what he was. What are you thinking? He asked quietly. You said they need to see you to confirm you're here. She spoke quickly, the plan forming as she voiced it. What if I meet them instead? Tell them I found you, tended your wounds, but you left an hour ago. Send them searching the wrong direction. They'll kill you for lying. Not if they believe me. She grabbed her shawl, wrapping it around her shoulders. I'm nobody, just a seamstress in a boarding house. Why would I lie to protect a vampire? I'll tell them you threatened me, forced me to help, then disappeared. They'll believe it because it's what they'd expect. Lucian caught her shoulders, his grip firm but not painful. Alara, if they sense deception they won't. She met his gaze steadily. Because I'm not lying. You are dangerous. You did threaten me. And you will be gone by the time they get here. Understanding dawned in his expression. You want me to actually leave. Through the roof like you said. But not to the catacombs, somewhere they won't think to look. Somewhere beneath their attention. She pressed her hand to his chest, feeling the too slow beat of his heart beneath her palm. Hide, Lucian. Heal. Let me buy you time. This is insane. But she heard the shift in his voice, consideration replacing refusal. It's survival. She stepped back, putting distance between them before her courage failed. I'll send them east toward the docks. You go west to where? Where would they never look? Lucian was silent for a long moment, then a bitter smile crossed his face. The Southern House territory. My cousin's scouts won't search beyond our borders without risking war. It's the one place they'd never expect me to hide. Then go there. Alara moved to the door. I'll give you 5 minutes, then I'll go downstairs and wait. When they come, I'll send them away. And if they don't believe you? She made herself smile, despite the fear coiling in her stomach. Then I'll die knowing I tried. Alara, go. She met his eyes one last time. We survived together, remember? This is me choosing to fight. Don't take that away from me. The bells tolled 3:15. Outside, footsteps echoed closer. Lucian kissed her forehead, a brief, desperate gesture, then vanished through her window with inhuman speed. Alara took a breath, steadied herself, and went downstairs to face the hunters. Chapter 6. Blood Odes and Broken Crowns. Alara sat in the boarding house's cramped common room, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. Mrs. Hewitt had gone to visit her sister, leaving the building empty except for old Mr. Garrett on the 3rd floor, who was mostly deaf. The perfect time for hunters to come calling. She heard them before she saw them, 3 sets of footsteps moving with a natural synchronization, too light, too precise. The front door opened without a knock, without announcement. They simply walked in as if they owned the building, owned the city, owned her. The first through the door was a woman who looked no older than 25, with copper hair and eyes like winter ice. Behind her came 2 men, one tall and severe, the other compact and watchful. All 3 wore fine clothes that marked them as gentry, but there was something wrong in how they moved, how they took up space, predatory, patient. The woman's gaze locked onto Alara immediately. You're alone. Not a question. Alara forced herself to meet those cold eyes. Yes, Mrs. Hewitt is out. If you're looking for lodging, we're looking for someone. The woman moved closer, and Alara smelled something sweet and wrong beneath expensive perfume. A man, wounded. He would have needed shelter last night. Alara let fear show on her face. It wasn't difficult. I don't know what you mean. Don't lie. The taller man spoke now, his voice carrying command that made her bones ache. We can smell him. Blood and old stone. He was here. Yes. The word tumbled out, and Alara made herself small afraid. Last night, he forced his way into my room, made me clean his wounds. I thought he was just a man, just someone hurt, but she let her voice break. His eyes, the way he moved, I knew he wasn't human. The three vampires exchanged glances. The woman tilted her head, studying Alara like a cat studying a mouse. Where is he now? Gone. Alara wrapped her arms around herself. He left before dawn, said he needed to reach the docks, find a ship. He threatened me, said if I told anyone, he'd come back, and she choked on the words, genuine terror flooding through her because she wasn't entirely acting. These creatures could kill her before she could scream. The docks. The compact man moved to the window, looking east. He's trying to flee the city. Coward, the woman hissed. The great Lucian Blackthorn, running like a wounded dog. She turned back to Alara. Did he tell you anything else? Names? Locations? Where he planned to go? No, Alara shook her head frantically. I swear. He just said his enemies were hunting him, that they'd burn everything he touched. I was too afraid to ask questions. The woman moved closer still, until Alara could see the inhuman stillness beneath her beauty. You're lying about something. I can taste it in your fear. Alara's heart hammered. I'm not. I just want to be left alone. I don't know anything about your politics or your come here. Command laced the words. Alara felt her body respond before her mind could protest. Standing and moving forward until she was an arm's length from the vampire, the woman reached out and gripped Alara's chin, tilting her head to expose her throat. He didn't feed from you. Interesting. Those cold eyes studied her face. You helped him freely. Why? The truth spilled out before Alara could stop it. Because he was dying. Because no one else would. Because she met the vampire's gaze with desperate honesty. Because I've been alone and afraid, and I recognized that in him. Even if he was a monster. Silence. The woman's grip tightened for a moment, then released. She stepped back, something like surprise flickering across her features. She's telling the truth, the woman said to her companions. Or believes she is. Either way, he's not here. She looked back at Alara with something that might have been pity. Forget you saw us. Forget you helped him. If questioned by anyone mortal or otherwise, you know nothing. Understand? Alara nodded mutely. The three vampires left as suddenly as they'd arrived, the door closing behind them with a natural quiet. Alara waited, counting her heartbeats, until she was sure they were gone. Then she collapsed into the chair, shaking violently. She'd done it. She'd lied to vampires and survived. But the real test was still ahead. Night fell like a curtain. Alara waited until full dark, then slipped out of the boarding house and headed west, toward the invisible border that separated northern territory from southern. Lucian had told her where to find him: an abandoned church that had lost its congregation decades ago. Sitting in the no-man's land between house territories, she found him in the bell tower, sitting with his back against the wall, his wounds looking worse than they had that morning. The silver poisoning had spread. She could see dark veins creeping up his neck, across his jaw. You're alive, he said when she climbed through the trapdoor. Relief and pain warred in his voice. They believed me. Alara moved to sit beside him. Or believed enough. They went east, toward the docks. That won't last long. Lucian's breathing seemed labored. Wrong. Once they realize I'm not there, they'll expand the search. And my cousin will come himself. He looked at her with ancient, tired eyes. I'm running out of time, Alara. Then tell me how to help. She took his hand, feeling how cold he'd grown. There must be something. There is. He met her gaze directly. But you won't like it. Tell me anyway. Lucian was quiet for a long moment, then spoke. When a vampire is poisoned with silver, it spreads through the bloodline like disease. The only cure is fresh blood, not just feeding, but a blood oath. A complete transfusion that burns the poison out through mortal vitality. Alara's mouth went dry. You need to drain someone, not just someone. His fingers tightened on hers. A willing participant. Someone who freely offers their blood with full knowledge of what it means. The ritual requires consent, trust, and he stopped. And what? A bond. He looked away. The blood oath doesn't just cure the vampire. It binds mortal to immortal, creates a connection that lasts until one of you dies. You'd feel my hunger, my pain, my rage. I'd feel your heartbeat, your dreams, your fears. We'd be linked across any distance, any circumstance. His voice dropped lower. It's why blood oaths are forbidden without explicit approval from house elders. They're too intimate, too binding. More than marriage, more than family, soul deep. Alara processed this, her mind racing. And if you don't do this ritual, if you just keep weakening, I'll die within 3 days. Simple truth. The silver will stop my heart, and I'll crumble to ash. No resurrection, no second chances, just gone. Then we do the ritual. The words came easier than they should have. Alara, you said it requires consent. I'm giving it. She turned to face him fully. You trusted me with your name, your crown, your secrets. Let me trust you with this. You don't understand what you're offering. Desperation crept into his voice. The bond would chain you to me for the rest of your mortal life. 50 years, maybe 60, if you're fortunate. Every day, you'd feel a vampire's hunger gnawing at your consciousness. You'd know when I feed, when I kill, he stopped, when you suffer. She finished quietly. I'd know that too, wouldn't I? Every moment of isolation, every century of loneliness you've endured. He stared at her. Yes, good. She squeezed his hand. Then you won't be alone anymore. Chapter 7. Silver and smoke illusion led her to the church altar, where moonlight fell through broken stained glass, painting the dusty floor in fractured colors. He moved slowly, each step costing him visible effort. The silver poisoning had progressed, his skin had taken on an ashen quality, and the dark veins now reached his cheekbones. We need to do this carefully, he said, his voice rougher than before. The ritual has 3 parts. First, I take blood from your wrist enough to weaken you but not endanger your life. Second, you drink a small amount of mine. Third, we complete the exchange through direct contact until the bond forms. Alara nodded, trying to ignore the fear threading through her chest. How will I know when the bond forms? You'll feel it. He guided her to sit on the altar step, positioning himself across from her. Like a door opening in your mind. Like suddenly hearing music you didn't know was playing. It's unmistakable. She offered her wrist, palm up. In the moonlight, she could see her pulse beating beneath thin skin. I'm ready. Lucian took her hand in both of his touch gentle despite his weakness. There's still time to refuse. Once we begin, Lucian. She met his gaze steadily. I choose this. I choose you. Start the ritual. Something shifted in his expression, gratitude and fear, and something deeper that made her breath catch. He lifted her wrist to his mouth, and she felt his lips brush her skin, surprisingly soft. Thank you, he whispered. Then his fangs pierced her flesh. The pain was sharp and bright, then faded into something almost peaceful. She felt her blood flowing into him, warm and vital. And with it went something else, her fear, her loneliness, her desperate hope that this strange connection might save them both. Lucian's eyes closed, and she saw color returning to his face, life flooding back into him. He drank for what felt like forever and no time at all. When he finally pulled back, Alara felt dizzy, weightless. He caught her before she could sway, steadying her with careful hands. Now you. He brought his wrist to his mouth and bit down, sharp and decisive. Dark blood welled up, nearly black in the moonlight. Drink, just a mouthful, no more. Alara pressed her lips to his wrist. The blood tasted like metal and winter and something ancient that her mortal mind couldn't name. She swallowed once, feeling it burn down her throat like ice fire. Lucian pulled his wrist away and took both her hands. Now we wait for the church doors exploded inward. 5 vampires poured through the opening, moving with coordinated precision. Alara recognized the copper-haired woman from the boarding house, but the others were strangers, older, more dangerous. And in the center, moving with predatory grace, was a man who looked so much like Lucian they could have been twins, the cousin. It had to be. How touching, the cousin said, his voice smooth as silk and twice as dangerous. The fallen king performing blood oaths with mortal cattle. Have you truly sunk so low, Lucian? Lucian stood, placing himself between Alara and the intruders. Marcus, Come to finish what you started? Come to claim what's mine. Marcus smiled without warmth. The northern throne, the house, the territories, everything you've held for too long. His gaze shifted to Alara. And to eliminate the mortal who's foolish enough to bind herself to a dying king. The bond hadn't formed yet. Alara could feel it. Incomplete, hanging between them like an unfinished sentence. The ritual needed time they didn't have. She's innocent, Lucian said. Let her go, Marcus. This is between us. No, Marcus gestured, and his vampires spread out, surrounding the altar. She chose her fate when she sheltered you. When she lied to my scouts. When she drank your blood. He tilted his head. Can you feel it, Lucian? How weak you still are. The ritual's only half complete. The bond isn't sealed, which means I can still break it. Alara's mind raced. 5 vampires against 1 weakened king. Lucian couldn't fight them all, even with fresh blood in him. They needed an advantage, something unexpected. Her eyes caught on the broken stained glass above. Moonlight streamed through it now, but in a few hours, dawn would break. If she could keep them here until sunrise. But no, even injured, these vampires would kill them long before dawn. Think like a mortal. What do mortals have that vampires don't? Then she saw it, candles on the altar, old and thick, covered in dust. And beside them, the church's ancient oil lamps, the kind that still used real flame. Fire. Vampires weren't weak to fire exactly, but smoke. Smoke in an enclosed space. Vampires needed to breathe less than humans, but they still breathed. And their senses were sharper, more sensitive. Lucian, she whispered urgently. How sensitive are you to smoke? He glanced at her, confusion flickering across his face. Very. It's disorienting. Clouds are tracking senses, understanding dawned. Alara, no. You can't. She was already moving, grabbing an oil lamp and hurling it at the far wall. Glass shattered. Oil spread across old dry wood. The copper-haired vampire lunged for her, but Lucian intercepted, slamming her back with strength that shouldn't have been possible for someone so recently dying. Alara grabbed a candle and threw it into the spreading oil. Fire bloomed. Hungry and bright. You'll burn yourself alive. Marcus shouted over the sudden roar of flames. Maybe. Alara grabbed more oil lamps, smashing them against walls, pews, anything that would burn. But you'll choke first. The church had been abandoned for decades. The wood was dry as bone, and the fire spread with terrifying speed. Thick black smoke billowed up, filling the space with acrid clouds that made Alara's eyes water. The vampires reacted immediately. The copper-haired woman stumbled, coughing, an unnecessary reflex but powerful enough to double her over. Another vampire clawed at his throat, his superior senses overwhelmed by the sudden assault. Even Marcus staggered back, his composure cracking. Retreat, he commanded, his voice strained. Fall back. But Lucian was already moving. He caught the nearest vampire and threw him into the flames with brutal efficiency. Grabbed another and snapped her neck, not fatal for a vampire, but debilitating. The smoke gave him cover, confusion, the split second of advantage he needed. Alara felt heat scorching her back as fire climbed the walls. The smoke was thick enough now that she could barely see, barely breathe. She dropped to her knees where the air was clearer, covering her mouth with her shawl. Lucian. She called. He materialized beside her, scooping her up with inhuman strength. Hold your breath. She buried her face in his chest as he ran through flames, through smoke, through the chaos of burning wood and panicked vampires. She felt heat searing past them, felt his body shield hers from falling debris. Then they were outside, in cold night air, and Lucian was setting her down in the overgrown cemetery behind the church. She gasped, coughing, her lungs burning. Behind them, the church was fully engulfed, flames reaching toward the sky like grasping fingers. She couldn't finish. Coughing too hard, 3 dead in the fire. Lucian knelt beside her, checking her for injuries. Marcus and 1 other escaped. He pulled her shawl away from her mouth, examining her face with careful attention. You're insane. Brilliant and insane. Did it work? She grabbed his arm. The blood, did it work? He flexed his hands, testing. The dark veins had receded from his face, and his skin held color again, pale but no longer ashen. Yes, you saved me twice tonight. Once with your blood, once with fire. Then we're even. She tried to smile, but another coughing fit seized her. Lucian pulled her close, and suddenly Alara felt it, the door opening, the music starting. the bond snapping into place like a key turning in a lock, his hunger, her heartbeat, two souls clicking together with devastating certainty. "We need to move," Lucian said, but his voice sounded distant, overwhelmed by the sudden intimacy of feeling his emotions alongside her own. "Marcus will return with more forces." Alara nodded, letting him help her stand. Behind them, the church collapsed with a roar of timber and flame. They ran into the darkness, bound now in ways neither fully understood, and somewhere in the city, Marcus Blackthorn planned his revenge. Chapter 8. The weight of foreverthy ran until Alara's legs gave out. Until her lungs burned worse than the smoke had. Until Lucian finally pulled her into the shadows beneath a railway bridge where freight trains rumbled overhead, and no one looked twice at desperate people hiding. In the dark, she collapsed against the stone foundation, shaking from exertion and shock, and the overwhelming sensation of him in her mind. His hunger a constant low thrum like distant thunder. His fear for her safety, sharp and jagged. His guilt, heavy as iron chains. "Too much," she gasped. "It's too much, I know." Lucian crouched beside her, and she felt his steadying presence both physically and through the bond. The first hours are always overwhelming. You're feeling 300 years of emotion compressed into mortal consciousness. It will settle, I promise. How long? She pressed her palms to her temples, trying to separate her thoughts from his. A day. Maybe two. His hand found hers, and the physical contact somehow made the mental connection less chaotic. Focus on my touch. Use it as an anchor. The bond follows. Attention when you focus on something concrete. The rest fades to background. She gripped his hand like a lifeline, concentrating on the cool pressure of his fingers, the texture of his skin. Slowly, the torrent of emotion receded to a manageable level. Still present, still humming beneath her awareness, but no longer drowning her. "Better?" he asked quietly. "Yes." She looked up at him, seeing him with both her eyes, and through the bond the exhaustion he hid, the pain he carried, the desperate hope he didn't let himself feel. "I can feel you lying when you say you're fine." His mouth curved in something too bitter to be a smile. "That will make things interesting." They sat in silence for a moment, just breathing, just surviving. Above them, a train rattled past, and somewhere in the distance, church bells tolled 4 in the morning. Dawn was still hours away, but Alara felt it approaching like a weight on the horizon. "We can't go back to my boarding house," she said finally. "Marcus knows about it now. We can't go anywhere in Northern Territory." Lucian leaned back against the stone, closing his eyes. "Marcus will have scouts watching every location I've ever used. Every safe house, every Eli's residence. He'll burn them all looking for us. Then we cross into Southern Territory. You said they wouldn't search there. The Southern house won't welcome us either." He opened his eyes, and she saw centuries of political maneuvering behind that gaze. "My cousin will have sent word by now the Northern king has fallen. Don't interfere. The Southern lady will honor that. She has no reason to risk war for a deposed vampire." Alara felt his despair through the bond, heavy and old and familiar. "Then where do we go?" "I don't know." The admission seemed to cost him. "For 3 centuries I've had power, territory, resources. Now I have nothing but," he stopped. "But me," she finished. "A mortal woman who set a church on fire. A mortal woman who saved my life twice." He met her gaze, and through the bond, she felt something she hadn't expected: reverence. "You're not nothing, Alara. You're everything I don't deserve." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning. She wasn't ready to examine. She looked away, focusing on the practical. "We need shelter. Somewhere to rest while we plan our next move. There's a place." Lucian spoke slowly, as if the words came reluctantly. "Outside the city, in the moorlands. An old estate that belonged to my maker, the previous queen. It's been abandoned for decades, even my house has forgotten about it. Marcus won't think to search there." "How far?" 10 miles. "We could reach it before dawn if we move now." He studied her face. "But you're exhausted. You've lost blood. Breathe smoke. Run for your life. You need rest, food, time to recover." "I'll manage." She pushed herself to standing, though her legs trembled with the effort. "Let's go." Lucian stood, and immediately steadied her when she swayed. Through the bond, she felt his concern, spike, sharp and protective. "Alara," I said, "I'll manage." She pulled away from his support, needing distance from both his touch and his worry. "Stop treating me like I'm fragile." "You're fragile." No heat in his voice, just truth. You're mortal, breakable, and I've put you in danger. That he stopped, jaw tightening. That I chose, she finished firmly. I chose to help you, chose the bond, chose to fight. Stop carrying guilt for my decisions. I can't. The words burst out of him raw. 3 vampires are dead because of me. Marcus will hunt you for the rest of your life. Now, you've lost your home, your work, your safety, everything because you showed compassion to a dying king who should have warned you away. He turned from her, shoulders rigid. I've destroyed you, Alara, just like I destroy everything I touch. The guilt pouring through the bond was suffocating. Centuries of self-loathing and isolation given form. Alara felt it trying to drown her, and for a moment, she let it. Let herself feel the full weight of what he carried, every life lost under his rule. Every culling he'd sanctioned before he'd found the strength to refuse. Every supporter who'd burned because they'd stayed loyal to a king who'd grown too tired to fight. Then she pushed back. Stop, she said. Just stop. Lucian turned, surprise flickering across his face. I can feel what you're feeling, Alara continued, her voice shaking. And right now, you're drowning in 300 years of guilt. That has nothing to do with me. I am not another tragedy to add to your collection. I'm not another thing you've destroyed. She moved closer, forcing him to look at her. I'm a person who made a choice. Honor that choice by treating me with respect. Silence. Then, through the bond, she felt his guilt shift into something else. Shame, yes, but also wonder, as if she'd said something he'd needed to hear for decades. You're right, he exhaled slowly. I apologize. Don't apologize. She gestured helplessly. Just be here, with me, not drowning in the past. I don't know how to do that anymore. Honest admission, vulnerable in a way that had nothing to do with physical weakness. Then learn, she offered her hand. We'll figure it out together. Like we figured out how to survive tonight. He stared at her outstretched hand for a long moment. Then slowly, he took it. The bond settled between them, intimate but no longer overwhelming, just a constant awareness of the other, a shared heartbeat across the space between mortal and immortal. 10 miles, Lucian said quietly. Can you walk that far? If you stop asking me if I can. She managed a tired smile. Lead the way. They left the railway bridge and headed west, toward the moorlands beyond the city's edge. The night was cold and clear, stars bright overhead. The world quiet except for their footsteps and the distant sounds of the waking city behind them. Alara walked beside a vampire king, felt his hunger and hope and fear as clearly as her own, and wondered what morning would bring to this impossible bond they'd forged. Behind them, Marcus Blackthorn gathered his forces for the final hunt. Ahead, in an abandoned estate full of ghosts and memories, waited the brief peace before the storm. Chapter 9. Lessons in the dark. Dawn broke over the moorlands as they reached the estate, a sprawling manor house swallowed by ivy and silence, its windows dark and empty. Lucian led her through gardens gone wild, past a fountain filled with dead leaves, to a servant's entrance that yielded with a push. Inside, dust covered everything like snow. Furniture stood shrouded in cloth, and portraits on the walls had faded to ghostly shadows. But the roof held, the walls stood firm, and most importantly, heavy curtains blocked every window. It's safe, Lucian said, his voice echoing in the empty foyer. The cellars have reinforced chambers from when this was a house stronghold. We can rest there until nightfall. Alara followed him down stone stairs into underground rooms that felt more like catacombs than living spaces. But one chamber had been furnished with unexpected luxury: a 4-poster bed, thick rugs, shelves lined with ancient books. A queen's sanctuary, she realized. The place where Lucian's maker had found peace before she'd walked into the sun. Sleep, Lucian urged, guiding her toward the bed. You're swaying on your feet, and through the bond, your exhaustion is making me dizzy. She wanted to argue, but her body betrayed her. The moment she sat on the bed, her muscles went liquid with relief. What about you? I'll keep watch. He moved to the chamber entrance, positioning himself where he could see the stairs. Lucian, she patted the space beside her. I can feel that you're exhausted too. The bond works both ways, remember? He hesitated, centuries of solitary sleeping, warring with the practical need for rest. Finally, he joined her on the bed, maintaining careful distance. They lay side by side in the darkness, not touching, just breathing. Tell me about her, Alara said quietly. Your maker, the queen who taught you to rule. Lucian was silent so long she thought he might not answer. Then, her name was Celeste. She was fierce and brilliant and absolutely terrifying when angered. But she also believed in mercy, that vampires could be guardians instead of predators. That immortality meant something beyond endless hunger and political games. Through the bond, Alara felt his grief, still raw after decades. You loved her. Like a mother. Like a mentor. Like the only family I'd known in 300 years. His voice roughened. When she walked into the sun, I felt it through our maker's bond. Like part of my soul burned to ash with her. Alara reached across the space between them and found his hand. He gripped her fingers as if she were the only solid thing in a dissolving world. I'm sorry, she whispered. They slept then. Or something like it. Alara sinking into exhausted unconsciousness while Lucian fell into day rest beside her. Through the bond, she felt him drift into that strange elsewhere state. Present but distant, aware but not quite conscious. She woke to find him watching her in the dim candlelight he'd lit while she slept. Outside, through the thick walls, she sensed the sun still hanging in the western sky. How long? She asked, her voice rough with sleep. For hours. He'd propped himself against the headboard, a book open in his lap. You were dreaming. I could feel it through the bond, something about fire and running. The church. The memory made her shudder. Do you always feel my dreams? When they're vivid enough, yes. He closed the book. Just as you'll feel mine, once you understand how to listen for them. Vampires dream differently than mortals, memories rather than imagination. 3 centuries of recollections playing in endless loops. Alara sat up, studying his face in the candlelight. Teach me how to navigate the bond, how to separate my thoughts from yours. Everything you know. So he taught her. They spent the afternoon in that underground chamber while sunlight faded above them, and Lucian explained the intricate rules governing vampire existence. How to shield her thoughts when she needed privacy. How to send emotions deliberately across the bond instead of letting them bleed through unconsciously. How the blood oath worked on a practical level. She'd age normally but would always know where he was. What he felt, whether he lived or died. If you're killed, he said carefully, the bond breaks immediately. I'll feel it like a door slamming shut. It's unpleasant, but survivable. And if you die? She had to ask. His expression went distant. The bond doesn't break for the mortal. You'd feel the void where I used to be for the rest of your life. An absence that never heals. It drives some blood-bonded mortals mad. He met her gaze. I'm sorry. If I'd known Marcus would attack so quickly, stop apologizing for things I chose. She shifted closer. Tell me something else. Something not about blood or death or politics. Lucian tilted his head, considering. What would you like to know? What do you miss most about being human? The question seemed to surprise him. Sunlight, he said after a moment. I was born in summer, and I remember how it felt on my skin, warm and bright and alive. I'd trade a century for one more day in the sun. Something in his voice made her ache. What else? Simple pleasures. Tasting food. Feeling truly tired instead of just weak. The ability to change, to grow older, to become something different than what I was. He looked at her. You're doing that now. Every day. You're becoming someone new. Mortals don't realize how precious that is. Teach me to appreciate it, she said. Teach me to see the world the way you see it, all those years of experience, all that accumulated wisdom, and you'll teach me what in return. But he smiled as he asked, already knowing the answer. Hope. She took his hand again, lacing their fingers together. You've spent centuries surviving. I'll teach you to live again. Through the bond, she felt his emotions shift, surprise bleeding into something warm and fragile, like the first thaw after endless winter. He pulled her closer, and she went willingly, letting him hold her in the candlelit darkness. Tell me about your human life, he murmured against her hair. Before your father's debts, before you had to run, what did you dream of becoming? No one had asked her that in years. A writer, she admitted. I wanted to tell stories, create worlds, give people an escape from their ordinary lives. Then you shall, he spoke with absolute certainty. When this is finished, when Marcus is dealt with and the house is stable, you'll write your stories. I'll make sure of it. How? She pulled back to look at him. I have no money, no education. No, you have me. His eyes caught the candlelight, luminous and intent. A vampire king's resources, assuming I reclaim my throne. And if I don't, he touched her face gently. Then we'll find another way. Together. The word together echoed through the bond, solid as stone, warm as the sunlight he'd never feel again. Alara leaned into his touch, feeling the impossible rightness of this moment, a mortal woman and an immortal king, bound by blood and choice, hiding from enemies in a dead queen's sanctuary. Tell me we'll survive tomorrow, she whispered, we'll survive, but through the bond. She felt his uncertainty, his fear that he couldn't protect her from what was coming. She kissed him then, not with passion but with promise. A pledge that whatever tomorrow brought, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else. Together, when they finally broke apart, night had fallen fully above them. It's time, Lucian said quietly. Marcus will have found our trail by now. He'll come tonight, then let him come. Alara stood, brushing dust from her skirt with determined movements. We've survived 3 nights. We can survive one more. Through the bond, she felt his fierce pride in her. His desperate wish that she'd chosen anyone else to save. His absolute certainty that he'd die before he let Marcus harm her. She felt all of it, accepted all of it, and loved him for it anyway. They climbed the stairs together, ready to face the final confrontation. Chapter 10. Crown of Ashesthi heard Marcus arrive before they saw him, the sound of multiple footsteps crunching through the overgrown gardens, deliberate and unhurried. He wanted them to know he was coming, wanted them to feel the inevitability of it. Alara stood beside Lucian in the manor's great hall, moonlight streaming through broken windows, illuminating dust motes that hung in the air like suspended snow. Through the bond, she felt his battle readiness, the predator awakening after days of weakness. 7 vampires, Lucian said quietly, tracking sounds she couldn't hear. Marcus brought his inner circle. He's not taking chances this time. Can you fight 7? She already knew the answer through the bond, but she needed to hear him say it. No honest admission. Even fully healed, those odds would be difficult. As I am now, he trailed off, but she felt his calculation through the bond. He might take 3, perhaps 4, before they overwhelmed him. The front doors burst open. Marcus entered first, flanked by 6 vampires, who moved with the synchronized precision of soldiers. In the moonlight, his resemblance to Lucian was even more striking, the same aristocratic features. But where Lucian carried centuries of weariness, Marcus wore naked ambition. Cousin, Marcus's voice echoed through the empty hall. I'm impressed. I expected to find you Ash by now, yet here you stand. The blood oath, I presume? His gaze shifted to Alara with predatory focus. And the mortal who saved you, how touching. Leave her out of this, Lucian said. Your quarrel is with me. My quarrel is with anyone who stands against my rightful claim. Marcus gestured, and his vampires spread out, cutting off escape routes. The Northern House needs a king who isn't afraid to enforce blood law, who understands that mortals are resources, not pets to be coddled. Is that what you'll tell the other houses? Lucian's voice carried command despite his weakened state. That you murdered your king through silver poisoning and starvation? They'll never accept a throne won through such cowardice. Rage flickered across Marcus's face. I won this throne by being stronger than a king who'd forgotten what power means, who chose mortal compassion over vampire supremacy. He smiled without warmth. They'll accept me because the alternative is chaos. A house without a king is vulnerable, open to invasion. I'm offering stability, you're offering tyranny, Alara said, her voice cutting through the tension. And cowards always dress tyranny in the language of necessity. 7 pairs of eyes fixed on her with deadly attention. Through the bond, she felt Lucian's terror for her safety, his desperate wish that she'd stayed silent. But she'd spent too many years being silent. The mortal speaks. Marcus took a step closer. Tell me, little blood bag, when my cousin offered you immortality as reward for your service, did you accept? Or are you simply waiting to die, having accomplished nothing? He didn't offer immortality, Alara said steadily, because he actually respects consent. Revolutionary concept, I know. Marcus laughed, and the sound raised goosebumps on her arms. How delightfully naive. Lucian, you've found yourself quite the prize. Pity I'll have to kill her. You'll have to go through me first. Lucian moved, putting himself between Alara and Marcus with inhuman speed. That, Marcus said, was always the plan. He attacked. Everything happened at once, Marcus lunging forward while his 6 soldiers converged from all sides. Lucian met the assault with centuries of combat experience, his movements fluid despite lingering weakness. He caught the first vampire by the throat and used them as a shield against 2 others, spun and threw another through a window in an explosion of glass and moonlight. But there were too many. They swarmed him, dragging him down through sheer numbers. Alara didn't think. She grabbed a heavy candelabra from a side table and swung it at the nearest vampire, catching them across the temple. The vampire stumbled, more from surprise than damage, but it was enough. Lucian broke free, snapping necks with brutal efficiency. 3 vampires down, 4 still standing, plus Marcus. Through the bond, Alara felt Lucian's energy flagging, the silver poisoning's lingering effects sapping his strength. He couldn't sustain this. They needed another advantage, another piece of human ingenuity. Her eyes caught on the chandelier above them, ancient and massive, hanging from a chain that looked questionable at best. It had to weigh several hundred pounds. If it fell, Lucian, she shouted, get Marcus under the chandelier. He understood immediately. Through the bond, she felt his trust, absolute and unquestioning. He engaged Marcus directly, driving him backward with savage attacks. Maneuvering him into position beneath the hanging death trap, Alara ran for the chandelier's chain mechanism, found the rusted pulley system, and yanked with all her strength. The chain held for a heartbeat, then gave way with a metallic shriek. The chandelier fell like divine judgment. Marcus looked up too late. The massive fixture caught him full on, crushing him to the floor in an explosion of crystal and twisted metal. Not fatal vampires were harder to kill than that, but devastating. Pinned and broken, his remaining soldiers froze, uncertain. Your king is defeated, Lucian said, his voice carrying absolute authority despite his ragged appearance. Yield or join him in the ash. One by one, they knelt. The aftermath was quieter than Alara expected. Lucian's supporters emerged from hiding once word spread that Marcus had fallen. Not many, but enough. They carried Marcus away to face judgment from the other houses, though everyone knew the verdict was already decided. Usurpers who failed earned only execution. The northern house was Lucian's again. Though the victory tasted like ash, they stood in the manor's overgrown garden as dawn approached, the sky bleeding pink and gold at the horizon. Lucian would need to retreat underground soon, but for now, he watched the coming light with longing written across his face. I have something to offer you, he said quietly. Now that the throne is secure, now that I have resources again, he turned to face her fully. Immortality. A place at my side as more than blood-bonded companion. Eternity, if you want it. Alara had known this was coming. Through the bond, she'd felt him thinking about it, weighing the offer, hoping she'd say yes, while fearing what that yes would mean. No, she said gently. Pain flickered across his face, quickly hidden. I don't want eternity, she clarified. Not yet. Maybe not ever. She took his hand, grounding them both. I want my mortal life, Lucian. I want to write my stories, learn who I am outside of survival, grow and change the way mortals do. I want to experience being human before I decide to give that up. Then the bond stays. She squeezed his hand. If you'll have me, not as a subject or a possession or someone you're obligated to protect, as a partner, an equal. Despite the difference in our lifespans, through the bond, she felt his emotions cascade, relief and fear and desperate hope tangled together. Partners, he repeated slowly, testing the word. Partners, she confirmed. I'll stand beside you when you need me. You'll support my dreams when I need you. We'll navigate this impossible bond together, learning as we go. And if someday I choose immortality, it will be my choice made freely, without coercion or desperation. And if you never choose it, his voice roughened. If I watch you age and die while I remain unchanging, then you'll have 50 years of genuine partnership, instead of an eternity built on obligation. She touched his face, feeling stubble that would never grow longer, skin that would never age. Isn't that worth something? Everything, he breathed. It's worth everything. He kissed her then, properly this time, not with desperate urgency but with the patience of someone who'd learned to value every moment. She tasted 3 centuries of loneliness giving way to hope, felt through the bond, his absolute commitment to honoring her choice, whatever it might be. When they broke apart, the sun had crept higher. Lucian's skin began to redden where the light touched it. Go, Alara urged. Before you burn, will you be here when I wake? Vulnerability threaded through the question. Always, she smiled. Partners, remember? He retreated into the manor's shadows, and she felt him settle into day rest through the bond, present but distant, aware but elsewhere. The strange intimacy of it still took her breath away. Alara turned to face the sunrise alone, feeling the warmth on her skin that he'd never feel again, living the mortal life she'd fought to keep behind her. A vampire king rested, Beside her, through an impossible bond, an ancient soul learned hope, and ahead, stretching into an uncertain future, lay the promise of partnership on her own terms, mortal and immortal. Bound by blood, but defined by choice, she walked back into the manor, ready to begin.